explanation of the emotions in both man and animals in terms of evolutionary theory. And this explanation is basically the one which we still accept, although it has been much elaborated on and improved since the time of Darwin. Yesterday I was talking about psychoanalysis and the tradition derived from that, and about the emotion of shame. Darwin, in his famous book on the expression of the emotions in man and animals, noted acutely that shame was hardwired into the human frame because of the physiology of blushing. We are all kind of hardwired to blush under situations where we feel shame, and this is a universal human characteristic. But the question again is about the nature of shame. It's a contrast with guilt. We said in the discussion on Monday that there's been a long series of debates and discussions about the relative importance of shame and guilt in different cultures around the world. And the three central lectures in the series are devoted to shame, and I'm going to say something about guilt on Friday. This is not kind of a reflection, I think, of the intrinsic importance of the subject. Guilt is probably very important, or just as important as shame, but the writing on the subject of shame is so much more comprehensive and so much better. There are lots and lots of things to say about shame, whereas the writings about guilt, certainly by the historians, tend to be very much concentrated on Western cultures since the Middle Ages. So there's less to talk about on the subject of guilt. It's not that it's less important. Now, yesterday I was mainly talking about shame as seen by the psychologists, and particularly by the psychoanalysts, and I related it to the notion of identity. Shame and the Search for Identity was the title of the lecture, and it was inspired by a famous book. But the hero of yesterday's lecture was the psychoanalyst Erik Erikson, who famously developed the notion of an identity crisis in late adolescence, when the individual chooses his or her kind of social role, takes all those important decisions about what career am I going to follow, should I stay in this country or move to another country, who am I going to marry, all those big kind of questions face people at the end of adolescence. And it's quite understandable that people have crises coming to terms with taking those big decisions. And the other major crisis which Erikson focused on, which I think is important, although it's been under-researched and not so much written about it, and it's not part of the popular culture, is the integrity crisis, which comes at the end of life when people look back on what they've achieved or what they've done, or the extent to which they have managed to live up to their youthful ideals. So it was the psychologists who had the main flaw yesterday, and in today's lecture and in tomorrow's lecture I'm going to be moving in the direction of sociology. There's always a tension between psychology and sociology. Sociology, of course, is concerned with the behavior of people in the mass. And the general idea is that a social setting is an importantly different setting from the individual considered in isolation. So the psychologist will be able to tell you about feelings of self-worth and self-esteem and that sort of thing for the individual considered privately and separately, but when we are wanting to go to the social setting, it becomes a question of interaction, it becomes a question of social expectations, and this makes an enormous difference. You cannot derive sociology from psychology, although psychology is, in some sense, a prerequisite for doing sociology. But somehow that business of interacting with many people, with having a framework of expectations laid down by the previous generation or more generally by vast social groups, makes an enormous difference. So what I'm going to be talking about today, you'll see it in the slide, is the sociology of warrior societies, the sociology of the Mediterranean, and the sociology of Africa. In all these cases, we have very important studies by historians mainly, but also by sociologists and social anthropologists. And the point here is that we are concerned with a very complex kind of set of expectations about the fulfillment of social roles centered on the notion of honor. Certain kinds of behavior are regarded as honorable, and certain other kinds of behavior as dishonorable. And when one does something which is dishonorable, this evokes shame. So there is this general idea of many societies enjoying an honor and shame complex, as it is often called, and this is a very important set of concepts. I'm looking at it today in relation to warrior societies like the Vikings and Mediterranean societies like contemporary Greece or historic Catalonia, and of course African societies right at the end. In all these cases, there has been fascinating work done, which I'm going to report on. And tomorrow, I will look at the honor and shame complex in the context of rather different societies, usually, and rather different periods, because I'm interested in things like nationalism and xenophobia. So that's what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. But today I'm concentrating on some of the classic ethnographies and some of the classic histories, particularly in the Mediterranean area, because the Mediterranean area is the place where this has been best studied and where we have the most comprehensive information stretching over the longest time period. So let's go to the start. The subject of today's lecture is the honor and shame complex, often found in warrior societies, but not only in warrior societies. And the modern study of this subject was initiated in the 1950s by the anthropologist James Campbell, who was of Scottish descent, part of the famous Campbell clan, and he spent, I think it was 2 years, in the middle of the 1950s, in northern Greece. And there you see him on the left in a picture with one of his informants. He died a few years ago, so this is taken from his obituary in The Guardian, but I think it's a lovely picture, showing you the anthropologist talking to an informant. And the classic book he wrote something like, actually I didn't check this, I probably ought to have checked this because there may well be books I'm not aware of, but there are kind of 3 major books by him on the subject. The first one, the most famous one, is this one whose cover is shown on the right, Honor, Family and Patronage, a study of institution and moral values in a Greek mountain community. Now, the mountain community involved is an extremely interesting community, the Sarakatsani. And they still exist in substantial numbers. And I will tell you something about them before giving you Campbell's analysis of the honor and shame complex among the Sarakatsani. Here we are. The Sarakatsani are a transhuman shepherd people. What is transhumans? Well, this is one of these technical terms which anthropologists like. They migrate. They basically migrate between summer and winter pastures. And so they don't have a fixed abode. They spend the summer in one part of the world and the winter in another part of the world. And sometimes the migrations can be very distant. And in the case of the Sarakatsani, they are. And they don't respect the boundaries of modern states. So the Sarakatsani are found not only in northern Greece, but as far north as Bulgaria. And in fact, some of these nice pictures I've got of the Sarakatsani are from the Bulgarian Tourist Agency. Now, as I said, they're a transhuman shepherd people who live with vast herds of sheep in mountainous country in Greece and the Balkans. And there in the picture, you see a wonderful group of Sarakatsani women wearing traditional costume, which is absolutely splendid looking. I have another slide of it. The traditional costume is black and white, with men mainly white and women mainly black. The sexual roles are very strongly differentiated in Sarakatsani society. And on the right, of course, you see the woman kind of standing up, and you can see how much is black and how much is decorated in her dress. The Sarakatsani are the subject of Campbell's 3 early books and a number of papers, but they've also been written about by other people. There are also very evocative accounts of the Sarakatsani given in the writings of some outstanding recent travel writers, such as Paddy Lee Fermor in his book Rumili on his travels to northern Greece, and Tim Salmon. So we actually have a lot of information about the Sarakatsani, and they are also wonderfully represented on the internet. So if I have time at the end, I will play you a little clip from YouTube showing the Sarakatsani dancing. The thing about Campbell's analysis is basically as follows. This is a society based on very strong family and kinship groups. Everything revolves around your identity as a member of a lineage. These are based on very strong family and kinship groups. The status of a family in the society depends still, I think, on its adherence to a traditional code of honor. And the code of honor is sharply differentiated between the sexes. This requires that men should be courageous and ready to defend the family honor in a fight. And that women should be sexually pure and always act modestly so as to be above suspicion. This kind of dichotomy between the roles of the two sexes is very strong in many Mediterranean societies. And it's connected with the fact that these are kinship groups where property is transmitted through these kind of lines of descent. And it's very important that the rules should be observed, that everybody should know who is who and where they come from. There must be no ambiguity about which people have which parents. So from that point of view, it's terribly important that the women should be sexually pure, they should be virgins on marriage, and that they should be faithful to their husbands. So the honor of a family depends on the purity and, in general, the modesty of its women. On the other hand, because these families are fairly competitive and status can be lost, and the loss can be catastrophic, it is terribly important also that the men should be ready to defend themselves and defend their families. The account given by Campbell in his book, on the one hand, is kind of wonderful and sort of inspiring, because these are remarkable people in all sorts of ways, but on the other hand is kind of terribly depressing, because an immense number of the men get killed in knife fights. And women kind of also sometimes lead lives which are very constricted, because they can't go anywhere unless they've got a male guardian, or that they are in a group of women together. So it's an example of a traditional society where the values are very strong, but they have this kind of binding and forceful quality because of the honor and shame complex. And this is true of very many Mediterranean societies. Campbell's book was the first book in a kind of explosion of Mediterranean ethnography, which occurred in the 50s and 60s. It was followed, I think, about a year later by a book on Cyprus by the Greek anthropologist Peristiani, and then a whole series of books on North Africa, on the Middle East, on Sicily, on northern Italy, on southern France, and on Catalonia and the Basque country in Spain. There's now a sort of general conviction that there is a kind of Mediterranean pattern. All around the Mediterranean you have these societies in which honor and shame are very important organizing principles. So, here we are. This analysis was generalized. Honor and shame complexes were identified in many Mediterranean communities. And the idea was used to explain all sorts of different behavior, harems and purdah, the Sicilian blood feud, and Jordanian honor killings. If a woman has endangered the reputation of her family in Jordan by immodest behavior, then she must be killed. That is the only way the honor of the family can be restored. And the Sicilian blood feud explains itself. Somebody who is frightened or lacking in manhood sufficient to take up the cudgels when the honor of the family has been impugned or when revenge is required, dishonors himself and dishonors his family, and so we get the Sicilian blood feud, which can be carried on, murder after murder over a period of over a succession of several generations. The blood feud is very characteristic of Sicilian society. And there are a whole lot of other examples, perhaps less dramatic, and you find it showing up in the mores, the behavior, the architecture. I'm always stunned when I go to Spain or Portugal, particularly the old villages, finding those balconies where you have a kind of wooden trellis so that the woman can sit behind and look out without being seen. Again, this thing about maintaining the purity of the women. It's an extraordinary feature of Mediterranean societies, and it has many, many ramifications. I'm going to mention just a few before giving some sort of general historical overview about the decline, or the threat of decline, of the honor and shame culture. Here is one very striking example. John Dominic Crossan who is a famous member of the Jesus Seminar in the United States, came from a Catholic background, but is now one of the sort of leading exponents of a kind of post-Catholic Christianity. Has written a book trying to explain various mysterious incidents in the life of Jesus. And the book is called The Historical Jesus, The Life of a Mediterranean Jewish Peasant. And of course, one of the things which is very strong in this book is the account of the society in which Jesus lived as being a Mediterranean society where there was a very strong honor and shame complex. So, all sorts of incidents in the New Testament which kind of readers up till the time of Dominic Crossan kind of failed to understand or failed to twig or sort of took at face value, and now get explained. The women at the well. Again, women must be kept under control, must be kept under a situation where there are witnesses all the time. So all those incidents in the life of Jesus where there are groups of women going to the tomb. Why do they go in a group? Because they've got to kind of maintain their public reputation. So here we have the application of the honor and shame complex to a very classic set of narratives which have been studied in the West for 2,000 years. But before John Dominic Crossan, nobody thought of trying to analyze Jesus as being a member of an honor and shame culture. And there are now actually books, I didn't bother to take them off the internet, with titles like Honor and Shame in the First Two Gospels, and Honor and Shame in the Synoptic Gospels, those kind of titles. And there's a huge amount of work being done on questions of honor and shame, both in the case of the life of Jesus as reported in the New Testament, but also increasingly in the Jewish tradition, looking at the Old Testament and looking at the various other writings which have come down to us, the so-called intertestamentary literature, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and of course the rabbinic commentaries once we get to modern Judaism. And here is an example of this kind of study. Again, I lifted it off the net. It's a study looking at references to guilt versus shame in the Bible, with the Old Testament marked in brown and the New Testament in dark brown. And you'll see that guilt is quite substantial, but is absolutely dominated by shame. References to shame are much more frequent in both the New and the Old Testament than references to guilt. And you'll see again the kind of growth when you compare guilt and shame, and it's also particularly interesting to compare the dark level at the top. It's a little difficult to see from this graphic, but it appears that Christianity is marginally more shame-conscious than Judaism. And that has been kind of argued in a number of other contexts. So again, this interesting question about the relationship between shame and guilt, which I'm going to return to later. But let's look now at another very interesting historical study. This is the great Spanish historian Juan Caro Baraka, they're depicted on the left, who traced the transformation of Mediterranean values from kind of simple folk values and perhaps also from Arabic values, because you've got to remember that Islamic rule in Spain lasted many hundred years. I think it was about 800 altogether, and the influence of the Arabs on Spain is very great. They had a kind of double dose of Mediterranean values from antiquity, and of course there's also the Visigothic period when they get invaded by people from the north, so perhaps those northern barbarian values, which are also perhaps worth saying something about because they're also an honour and shame conception, although a rather different one from the Mediterranean one, and then the Moorish conquest and occupation. And the crucial point, however, was the emergence of feudalism in the Spanish Middle Ages, and there is this extraordinary kind of character, Alfonso X of Castile, known as Alfonso el Sabio, Alfonso the Wise, who's one of those kind of legendary kings to whom all sorts of things are attributed. From our point of view, the most important thing about him was that he was a lawgiver, a codifier, and he took the various codes which he'd inherited, some of which were basically Roman, some of which were barbarian, the Visigothic code, and the canons of the church, and produced a compilation of his own, which was one of the most successful codifications in Spanish history, known as the Siete Partidas, because it's in 7 parts, and it's that law code which somehow marks the transition from the old kind of elementary ideas about honour and shame to a rather more elaborate feudal set of ideas. As I put it there in the top of the slide, it's the transition to feudalism in the form of the society of orders. This is a technical term which has been used by a number of historians, notably some French historians, Roland Mousnier and company, for societies in which status is regulated by law. So that one is born into a certain estate on the basis of who are one's parents and what their legal status is. Of course, the idea of legal status goes right the way back. A huge part of Roman law is concerned with the status of being a slave, or the status of being a free man, or the status of being a nobleman, part of the equites. But somehow the impact of Christianity in particular on Roman society was to dilute that kind of emphasis on status, and it kind of has to be rebuilt from the bottom up in the Middle Ages, and it is rebuilt in a whole lot of European societies, and so we refer to these societies where status is regulated by law as the society of orders. The sort of official theory is usually that there were 3 great orders: the orders of the people who fought, the orders of the people who prayed, and the orders of the people who worked with their hands. The theory of the 3 orders, as it's often called, which emerges in France in the early Middle Ages, but is taken up all over Europe and elaborated on, and was elaborated on by Alfonso X of Castile. And the elaboration is quite extraordinary. I mean, he distinguishes all sorts of peculiar situations in which people can lose caste or can gain caste, and it's a very remarkable kind of picture of the social structure he gives. And Juan Caro Baraka, this great Spanish historian, who was of Basque extraction, his uncle on his mother's side was the great Basque novelist Pío Baroja. And he was brought up by Pío Baroja in northern Spain, his father having spent most of his time in Madrid. He was actually born in Madrid, and Juan Caro Baroja was sort of much loved all over Spain. I think the picture I've got there is of him in a park in Barcelona. I'm a little uncertain about this, but it looks like a certain park I once went to in Barcelona, so it maybe my memory has got some kind of credibility here. But he was much loved all over Spain, and he wrote extensively on the Spanish social structure and its history, and he wrote also about the history of witchcraft in Spain. Because he was brought up by his grandfather in a little Basque village where people still believed in witches. Caro Baroja is the great modern authority on the Spanish social structure, historically speaking, and Alfonso El Sabio was, to some extent, his hero. And he's also one of my heroes, I think, not so much for the Siete Partidas as for the music he wrote. He was a very accomplished musician, and I can't resist the temptation to give you a little bit of music. Am I getting this right? No, I'm not. Where's my help? Press on? Oh, there. Ah, sorry, I'm pressing the wrong thing. Still having problems. Here we are. Just a little snippet. I always think it's extraordinary that we can hear the voices of people from several hundred years ago if we go back and listen to their music. A little bit there from laptop, yes, good. From the music of Alfonso El Sabio. And now I'm going to go to another historian who's made a kind of imaginative use of the idea of the Mediterranean honor and shame complex. And this is the classicist J.E. Lendon, who recently wrote a wonderful book called Song of Wrath, showing the importance of understanding Greek concepts of honor. When one is reading the great classical Greek historians, in particular, he provides a marvelous reanalysis of Thucydides, the great historian of the Peloponnesian War. And so the book is subtitled "The Peloponnesian War Begins." It's an absolutely marvelous piece of imaginative writing. I can't read you very much, but just to give you the flavor, the book opens with a kind of skirmish outside the walls of Megara, where the Athenians and the Spartans are kind of having a standoff. And from the modern point of view, it's very strange, because both armies kind of come out and sort of stand in front of one another until eventually one army stands down. So it's a question of who blinked first. Or that's what it seems, but it turns out that there's more than meets the eye. So this is what he comments. To us, the climactic encounter between Brasidas and the Athenians on the plains of Megara seems as strange as a confrontation between tribes of hooting apes or a standoff between feathered savages in a faded documentary. Its logic was not that of modern war in all its glistening lethality, but that of drunks in a bar, eyes locked on eyes, shouting, "What are you looking at?" and inching closer and closer to each other, knuckles gleaming, until one drops his gaze and yields the victory. Under the rapt observation of the Megarians, watching from the walls of the city, Brasidas led out his army, arraying it for battle, facing the port of Megara. Out came the host of the Athenians, deploying for battle opposite Brasidas. Time passed. Each side stood regarding the other. Then finally the Athenians filed back within the walls of the port. Brasidas led his army back to camp. And so it was that the Megarians opened their gates to Brasidas and the Peloponnesians, because Brasidas had recovered the loyalty of Megara. The Athenians could have attacked the army, but their general chose not to. And the reason Thucydides gives, he attributes to the Athenian generals, the reasons he attributes to the Athenian generals are strikingly modern. The generals had accomplished the minimum the Athenians had sent them to do, taking Megara's port. Taking Megara itself would have been a nice bonus, but placing the city itself in Athenian hands was primarily the ambition of the pro-Athenian Megarian cabal rather than that of the Athenians themselves. The Athenians were somewhat outnumbered and therefore at a disadvantage, but most of all, Athens' generals were committed to force protection, to limiting their own casualties, even at the expense of full success. The army opposed to them, they reasoned, was made up of soldiers from several different Greek states. Even in the event of a defeat by Athens, no one state would suffer crippling losses of men. But nearly all the soldiers on the Athenian side were Athenians, and so, win or lose, whatever casualties the Athenian side took, Athenian citizens themselves would suffer. There was a good practical logic then for them declining to engage the Peloponnesians. But things were rather different from the other side. The Megarians viewed the conflict unfolding before the walls of their city as something far different, stranger and nobler. They saw it as a trial of manhood being performed before them, a trial governed by tacit rules. According to the conventions of classical Greek war, one army might challenge another to battle by drawing up in a fair and open place. Then the other army was expected to answer the challenge by moving forward to attack the challenger. Both were expected to play their different parts like knights at a tournament. The one who thumped the shield of another with his lance to call him forth to fight, and the other who came forth from his pavilion to meet the challenger in the lists. In Greece, such a challenge to battle might, of course, be refused. And many, perhaps majority of cases, such challenges were indeed refused because the challenged state feared a bloody defeat. But refusing to fight was an act of cowardice and proved the challengers braver. And on this occasion, there was, on the walls of Megara, a keen audience to the contest, an audience whose loyalty hung in the balance, an audience resolved to ally itself with the better men. So when Brasidas came forth first and drew up his army in the plain, he was delivering to the Athenians a well-understood challenge. To answer that challenge, the Athenians had to draw their army against him and attack. The Athenians drew up, but for sound, rational, modern-sounding reasons, they did not advance to fight. And so it was that Brasidas won the contest of manhood, and with it Megara, in a victory without tears. Now at last the gates of Megara flew open, and Brasidas and his captains entered the city and sat down with their friends to make quite sure that the loyalty of Megara would never quake again. The historian Thucydides did not trouble to explain exactly why the Megarians rejoined the Spartan alliance. Brasidas had won and the Athenians declined battle, was all the explanation he needed to give. The Megarian decision arose from a set of assumptions about the ways of men and states that Thucydides knew his ancient Greek readers shared with him. It's today's Western readers who need to be filled in on the logic, because to us it is strange and shadowy. The logic of the Megarians was part of the heroic code of the Greeks. Always to be the best and preeminent above others was the aim of the heroes of the Iliad. And that aim was passed down the generations into later Greece, with only the respects in which an individual sought to excel changing over time. Like our society then, Greek society was competitive, but the Greeks, at least those of the upper classes, whose wealth freed them from want, competed primarily not for money, but rather for honor or glory. Worth, they called it, time, the Greek word. Time was how the Greeks ranked themselves against each other. To be best was to possess the most time, which consisted of esteem by others, and others' confirmation of one's lofty impression of one's own merits. And let me skip to the crucial thing. Yet the political dimension of time held danger. For one Greek's giving a command to another usually implied the inferiority of the commanded in honor. If the commanded did not accept the inferiority, the command was an insult, an act of belittlement, an attempt to deprive the commanded of time by acting as if he were of lesser rank than the person who presumed to give the command. The Greeks had a fateful term for such an insult to time, which they regarded as giving rise to much or even most of human conflict. They called it hubris. Hubris was both the act of insult, whatever the reason for it, and the arrogant disposition that disposed a man to the insult. And it is from this second sense of the word that modern usages of the term hubris derive. And so the normal Greek reaction to an act of hubris was overpowering anger, huge wrath, which in turn propelled revenge. Only when revenge was achieved, the theory held, could the imbalance in honor be fixed, and only then did the wrath abate. Very powerful. Anyway, so these are examples of historians making use of the analysis originally offered by J.K. Campbell, although there are parts of Campbell's analysis which I think have never been used and probably should be used, particularly his analysis of patronage. Patronage, you know, is such an important concept in various societies, including our own, and there were situations in which the offer of patronage or declining patronage did affect honor. And so there's more, again, in those classic books than people are making use of nowadays. But let's move on. Now, conceptions of honor were also important in Northern Europe, among Scandinavian Vikings and among the German warrior castes. And the big question we've got to ask is what caused this type of society to decline? And this is a question which I'm going to be asking again tomorrow. And here's some factors which have commonly been invoked for explaining why the Society of Orders disappeared in most of Europe, and why, although we still have Sicilian honor killings, Sicilian blood feuds and Jordanian honor killings, in most parts of the Mediterranean, the honor and shame complex is much less marked than it was. I was very struck last year during the Greek economic crisis by, again, finding that Greeks were invoking concepts of honor to explain their relationships to the Germans and to other Europeans. But it is a fact that the ancient honor and shame complex has declined in most parts of the Mediterranean. And that's perhaps one reason why Campbell's study of the Sarakatsani is so strong and convincing, because this being a primitive mountain people, the decline is less marked among them. Now, here's some reasons. Changes in religion. Ancient family centers values were already under attack by Christianity in late antiquity. When men were deserting the cause of becoming a senator or joining the army in order to go and become a monk in a monastery, or women were going into a nunnery, this was turning their backs on family values. And so Christianity was very important in late antiquity in undermining the kind of tyranny of the lineage. And in European history, in the long run, the Protestant Reformation carried this a great deal further. The Protestant Reformation, of course, tended to abolish monasteries and nunneries, but there were other ways in which the Protestants were determined to get rid of what they saw as a pagan survival in feudalism, in terms of the code of honor, in terms of things like dueling. Of course, dueling is one of the classic ways in which a warrior society recognizes and protects honor. And dueling was steadily abolished in Europe over a period of several centuries, lasting, I think, from the 16th till the 19th. There are various other ways in which the Protestants undermined the code of honor. One way, of course, was the general conviction that that the believer was in the direct presence of God. The Protestants did away with the mediating role of the priest, and if you were present to God all the time, you couldn't hide. You couldn't be reliant on your interaction with other people for maintaining your honor. One of the kind of things about the honor societies is that you get a certain kind of hypocrisy whereby it's okay to cheat provided you don't get caught. Well, if you're a thoroughgoing Protestant, that's not the case. God will know, even if nobody else does, that you violated the code of morals. So, changes in religion, then changes in economic life, the growth of the cities, and eventually the growth of modern capitalism undermined feudalism. Then, thirdly, the growth of modern legal systems put an end to systems of self-defense. Litigation replaced dueling. This is, again, an interesting and complex kind of evolution in the history of law. But once you get to modern times, reputation is sometimes thought of in capitalist terms, in terms of an asset, which is kind of bankable and can be evaluated, and therefore you can sue for restitution when your honor has been impugned, and you get the development of laws of libel and slander. The growth of modern legal systems is also part of this. And then finally there are changes in high culture and political philosophy, and I just mention in passing, because I can't really today go into it, I might answer a question about it if somebody really wants to know at question time. Descartes defended dueling, but Hobbes was virulently opposed to it. So we have all these changes which affected the survival of the honor culture in the different parts of Europe, but it survived least in those parts of Europe like Germany and Scandinavia which were Protestant. Survived more in Catholic areas, but even there was subject to very stringent attacks by the Church, as we will see when we come to talking about the Counter-Reformation and guilt. So let's go on to Africa. In comparison with Mediterranean and European societies, the study of honor and shame in Africa has been little advanced. There's a tiny bibliography. There's one simple observation you can make, which is made nicely here in this map, is that the survival of ancient African ideas about honor, very much along Mediterranean lines, has been affected by the spread of the world religions, Islam and Christianity. And here you see this different colors on the map, showing the areas of Africa which are mainly Christian and the areas of Africa which are mainly Muslim. One needs to say that the founders of the great world religions all were opposed to major parts of the code of honor, particularly revenge. Think of Jesus' famous injunction to turn the other cheek. The same is actually true of Islam, although this is less widely appreciated. I think because Muhammad tended to issue very sort of specific, narrow instructions rather than general condemnations, and sometimes he sort of rather withdrew and bulked. For example, he was very concerned about fights between his followers on the lines of people taking revenge, and so he issued stern instructions against deliberate insulting. And in particular, and this of course is a sort of fatal decision, he forbade the traditional practice of satiric verse making. So, Islam also tried to suppress the traditional honor culture, but rather less comprehensively and less successfully than Christianity. And as a general kind of philosophy, both Christianity and Islam favored individualism, which again weakens the whole of the family, and the idea of the family honor being an all-important thing. But there's one masterly synthesis, one great book on the subject by John Iliff. It's called Honor in African History. And it's a survey of most of the continent, but is particularly good on West Africa and on South Africa. He actually came out to South Africa to do research in the Cape Archives. He's a Cambridge historian, very well-known scholar of African history, and so there's wonderful coverage of those warrior societies in West Africa, where mounted warriors mounted on horses came out of the desert to establish kind of kingdoms like the Sokoto Caliphate, and he's good on South Africa. It's very remarkable, and I want to finish by mentioning that in general he shows that the sense of honor remains strong in African societies, even after colonial conquest, even after Christianization or Islamization. Just let me read from the dust jacket of the book. Before European conquest, many African men cultivated heroic honor, which admired the civic virtues of the patriarchal householder, and women honored one another for industry, endurance, and devotion to their families. These values both conflicted and blended with Islamic and Christian teaching. Colonial conquest fragmented heroic cultures, but inherited ideas of honor found new expressions in regimental loyalty, in respectability, in professionalism, in working class masculinity, the changing gender relations of the colonial order, and nationalist movements which overthrew the old order. Today, the same inherited notions obstruct democracy, inspire resistance to tyranny, and motivate the defense of dignity in the face of HIV/AIDS. So, wonderful book, and I just want to mention the extraordinary thing that he found in the Cape archives. He shows that that European transition to kind of litigation in place of fighting also occurred among African converts to Christianity. So in the 1840s, you start getting Christian converts in the Cape province taking to the law to defend themselves against various kinds of insults and libel. And this is a kind of quite extraordinary thing because it included defending themselves against the racist slurs offered by white colonists. So, absolutely astonishing, the kind of history of honor in Africa. Thank you. We're going to, I'm going to try and get the Sarakatsani dancing, but anybody who needs to leave, please leave now, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion. Okay. 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 Righto. Are there any questions? I don't. Actually, I think it's a wedding celebration. But I'm not sure about that. I should really have done my homework better. I just found it on YouTube last night and thought it looked wonderful. Yeah.
In the Middle East, this whole war between the Arabs and the Westerners.
Yes.
To what extent does honor affect between the different faiths?
Oh, it's very much a did you hear that? He asks about a war in the Middle East, and he's asking to what extent is honor an issue between the different faiths. And the answer is yes, it's very much a factor.